The march had begun before dawn. 300 men moved through the valley in near silence, the kind that settled over soldiers who had made peace with what came next. No celebrations, no battle cries. The fortress of the late Lord Orlan Voss had no army left to defend it. Its lord was 3 days dead, killed by the very men he had been selling secrets to when they decided he had become more liability than asset. What remained was a stone structure full of empty rooms and damning records, and it was Bastian's intention to leave none of it standing before nightfall. General Drest rode at his left. The old soldier had said very little since they broke camp at first light, which meant he had said more than enough the night before. 300 men to demolish an empty building, Drest had noted at dinner, in the tone he used when he disagreed with orders but was too disciplined to say so outright. 300 men because I don't know what Voss left behind, Bastian had answered, and I prefer to be wrong about that with 300 soldiers than to be right with 30. Drest had not argued further. He rarely did. He simply carried the disagreement in the set of his jaw and waited for the world to prove him right or wrong. The valley opened before them as the sun broke the ridgeline. A flat stretch of land caught between two slopes, white from the last snowfall, unmarked except for the fortress walls visible at the far end and the road cutting through the center. Bastian estimated 2 hours at march pace before they reached the gates. They covered less than half that distance before the column stopped. No order was given, no signal from the front. The soldiers simply stopped. Bastian felt it before he understood it, a pressure in the column's rhythm, a disruption moving backward from the vanguard. He heard it in the horses first. 3 animals in the cavalry line refused to advance, pulling against their reins with a slow, stubborn resistance that their riders couldn't overcome. Not panic, something else entirely. Then the wolves. 6 of his shifted soldiers stood frozen at the edge of the snowfield. They were not growling. They were not retreating. They stood with their bodies pulled tight, caught between an instinct to advance and something none of them had a name for. He had seen his soldiers freeze before battle, before ambush, before the scent of something wrong reached the rest of the column. This was different. Their heads were lowered, not in threat, in something closer to deference. "My king," Drest's voice was carefully controlled. "I see it." Bastian remained in human form. Whatever had reached the shifted soldiers had not reached him the same way, but his wolf had woken without warning and was now pressing forward against his chest with an urgency that had nothing to do with danger. He knew what danger felt like. He had spent 11 years learning the specific quality of it, the way his animal self went cold and focused and still. This was not that. This was oriented. His wolf wanted something in the direction they were marching, and it wanted it with an insistence that made clear thinking difficult. He stood in the stirrups and looked past the frozen soldiers, past the field. There was a figure in the snow, a woman, 200 yards ahead, facing away from the army. She wore black, a long dress, dark against white, a veil that the wind lifted and dropped. She had a shovel. She was digging. She had not looked up. "Hold the column," Bastian said. "Sire." He dismounted before Drest could finish the sentence. "Hold the column," he repeated. "I'll go on foot. You will not go alone into an unsecured—" "There is one woman with a shovel, Drest." He handed his reins to the nearest rider. "Stay back." He walked. The snow was deep enough to slow him, shallow enough to move through. The woman did not turn. She continued to dig with a focused, mechanical motion, driving the shovel in, lifting the snow-packed earth, stepping aside, driving it in again. The ground was nearly frozen. He could tell from the resistance in each movement, from the way her arms shook with the force required. When he was close enough to see the detail clearly, he stopped. There was a body at her feet, wrapped in rough linen, placed carefully on a length of cloth laid flat over the snow. The face was covered. The hands of whoever had arranged it had been deliberate. The folds were precise, the edges tucked. She drove the shovel into the ground again. It barely caught the surface. She adjusted the angle, found a seam in the frozen soil, and this time it held. She was methodical. She had been doing this for some time. Bastian looked at the wrapped figure. He recognized the build, the shoulders. He had studied enough descriptions, enough testimony, enough detailed accounts of Orlin Voss over 4 years to recognize what remained of the man without seeing his face. "You know who I am," he said. The shovel stopped. "Yes." Her voice was even. She did not turn. "And you know who he was?" "I know what he did." She drove the shovel in again. "Those are not the same thing." Bastian studied the back of her head. A dark braid with a reddish cast that had slipped over one shoulder, black fabric moving in the wind. "How long have you been at this?" "Since before the light changed." A pause while she worked the blade deeper. "The ground is harder than I expected." He crouched and picked up the second shovel he had not noticed until that moment, lying flat on the snow a few feet away. She had brought it herself, on the calculation that the first might break or that she might need relief. He drove it into the ground beside her. She turned then. Green eyes, direct and steady, with the kind of steadiness that came not from calm, but from having already spent all available panic somewhere private before he arrived. A streak of frozen mud ran along one cheek. She looked at the shovel in his hands, then at his face, then at the shovel again. She did not tell him to stop. They worked without speaking. Bastian found the rhythm, locating the soft seams in the frozen ground, following them, trading depth for width in the places where the cold had gone deepest. The woman worked beside him without comment. At some point the silence between them shifted quality, though he couldn't have said when. When the depth was sufficient, she set her shovel down and moved to the body. He stepped back without being asked. She arranged the linen with careful hands, tucking the edges, adjusting the fold at the shoulders with a precision that suggested she had been planning this specific moment since the day she found the letters. Then she straightened and stood still for a few seconds. "Thank you," she said. Not to him directly, not quite to anyone. "What is your name?" "Calla Voss." Bastian nodded toward the far end of the valley. "The fortress. I know." Her eyes moved to the stone walls rising against the ridge. "I am not asking you to spare it. A breath. Only to wait until I am done." He waited. The fortress fell in 40 minutes. His engineers knew their work well. Bastian stood at the field's edge and listened to the sequence of collapses without watching. His attention kept returning to the woman in black, who had finished and now stood motionless beside the mound of turned earth, her hands at her sides, her eyes somewhere beyond the valley walls. She was not crying. He had expected her to be. He found, examining that expectation, that he hadn't known quite what he had expected. Dressed materialized at his shoulder. "She came alone," the general said. "No escort, no servants, a horse and 2 shovels. I noticed. The men are unsettled." Dressed kept his voice low. "The shifted soldiers still can't explain what stopped them. I can't explain it either. Whatever it was, it came from that direction." He paused. "From her direction. I know. That concerns me. It should." Bastian watched her. "Find somewhere to set up a table. Appropriate, not comfortable." Dressed was quiet a moment. "You're going to question her." "I'm going to talk to her. We." When Calla Voss received word that the Alpha King required her presence, she came without hesitation and without the performed grief that nobility tended to arrange on their faces for moments like this. She sat across from him at the field table, a rough thing set up in the shadow of what remained of the western wall, and she folded her hands in her lap and waited. He started from the beginning. She answered from the beginning. The letters had been in a locked chest beneath the study floor. The floor above it had always made a slightly different sound when walked across, and in the 3 days between Orlin's death and this morning, she had had enough time and enough silence to go looking for things that sounded wrong. The letters documented 4 years of border intelligence sold in sections, troop movements, supply routes, patrol schedules, to 2 different buyers in rival kingdoms, sometimes at cross purposes, always for a price. She knew the buyers' names. She knew the dates. She knew 3 exchange locations and 1 name that appeared repeatedly in a coordinating role. Someone local, someone she had never met, whose function she couldn't determine from the letters alone. Bastian's scribe recorded everything. Then Bastian asked the question he had been building towards since the field. Voss conducted negotiations over several years, difficult ones. Men who arrived hostile consistently left settled. He watched her face. How did he manage that? Calla's hands stilled in her lap, a small arrest of motion while she assembled her answer. He brought me, she said, to the negotiations. To all of them. Her eyes dropped briefly to the table. He said I had a gift for easing tension. He called it presence. Her jaw tightened just slightly. I thought he was being generous. Did it work when you were present? Yes. The word came out flat and certain. Always. Bastian studied her. She hadn't elaborated, and she had the look of someone holding a question she hadn't yet given herself permission to ask. He recognized the shape of it. He had worn it himself in the days after receiving the first intelligence reports on Voss, when the evidence had been clear enough to act on, but still too large to fully take in. He did not tell her what he suspected. Not here, not at a field table with the smoke from her husband's fortress still threading through the cold air above them. I want to take you to the capital, he said. As a material witness, appropriate accommodation, freedom to move within the residence. Not a cell. Not a cell. She looked at him steadily for a moment. I have nothing to return to. The house was Orland's. The servants were Orland's. Everything in it was built on what he did. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. I'll come. When she left the table, Drest stepped in before the chair had time to cool. The council will object, the general said. The council objects to most things. Sire. His voice dropped. She is Voss's widow. Bringing her to the capital under the Alpha King's protection is a statement whether you intend it as one or not. I intend it as an investigation. She has information we don't have, and she carries something none of my shifted soldiers could push through. I intend to find out what that is. Drest held the pause as long as his discipline allowed. And if there is another reason? Bastian met his eyes. Then I'll address it when it becomes one. He left the table. His wolf, which had been restless and forward-pressing since the moment he first spotted her figure in the white field, settled into a quiet he hadn't felt in years. Not ease, not relief, something more like recognition. The specific stillness of an animal that has found what it didn't know it was searching for, and is choosing, for the moment, not to move. He did not examine it closely. There was a column to organize, a fortnight of travel ahead, and a smoldering ruin at his back. The column reformed as the afternoon light moved off the ridge and the valley fell into early shadow. Calla Voss rode near the center on a dark horse, straight-backed, her black veil folded and tucked away now that the burial was finished. 2 of Bastian's soldiers flanked her at a respectful distance. Drest came alongside him as the march resumed. She didn't cry, the general said. No, not once, not at the grave, not at the table. I noticed. Drest chewed on that for a moment. What does that mean to you? Bastian kept his eyes on the road ahead, where the valley narrowed and the tree line began. It means she had already done it, he said, before we arrived. The army moved north. Behind them, the last standing wall of Orland Voss's fortress gave way with a sound like a long exhale and came down into the snow. Calla did not look back. Neither did Bastian, though for an entirely different reason. The first village was called Wethmore. Bastian knew this because it appeared on 3 of the supply route maps that Voss had sold. The delivery schedules altered, the quantities falsified, the winter provisions rerouted before they could reach the granaries. He had ordered the column to pass through it rather than around it, which added half a day to their march and earned him a look from Drest that could have cut stone. He didn't explain himself. He rarely did. Calla understood when they arrived. The village had the particular quiet of a place that had stopped expecting help. The headman met them at the road's edge, a gray-haired man whose expression moved through wariness, recognition, and a careful suppression of whatever he actually felt about an army appearing at his gate in the same season that army's intelligence failures had left his village short on grain. 2 soldiers had died from this village. Bastian knew their names. He had made a point of knowing all the names. He did not dismount immediately. He gave Calla the space to do so first. She walked to the headman and introduced herself without title or prefix. Just Calla. She asked how the village had managed since autumn, and she asked it with the particular attentiveness of someone who actually wanted the answer. The headman, who had clearly prepared a version of the story trimmed for royal ears, found himself telling a longer one. Bastian watched from horseback as the conversation stretched past courtesy into something real. Dressed came alongside him. This wasn't in the route. No, it will take us an additional... I know how long it will take. Dressed went quiet. Below them, Calla had moved to sit on the edge of a stone wall beside the headman. She was listening, with her whole body oriented toward the speaker, and nothing in her face that suggested she was preparing what to say next. 2 village women had come out, then 3 more. Then a boy who asked one of the soldiers something about the horses and was given a serious answer by a man who had lost a younger brother in the border ambush that Voss's sold information had made possible. They stayed 2 hours, longer than Bastian had planned. When they remounted and continued north, Calla rode closer to the front of the column than she had the previous day. Not beside him. She kept a distance that suggested she was still working out what proximity was appropriate, but no longer at the guarded center, surrounded by soldiers who had been told to watch her without being told why. That evening she told him what she had observed. They were stopped at a farm that had agreed to shelter the officers, a wide barn, clean enough, with a house attached where the farmer's family made themselves scarce. Bastian was reviewing maps when Calla appeared at the barn door and asked if she could speak. He set the maps down. Speak. She described a pattern. Across 3 villages, Wethmore and 2 others he had detoured through in the prior days, survivors had mentioned someone they referred to only as the courier. Not Voss directly. Someone who moved between the villages and the border, made collections, and had last been seen in the area less than 2 weeks ago, after Voss was already dead. After, Bastian said. After. Her hands were steady in her lap. Whatever he was carrying, or whoever he was carrying it for, it didn't stop when Orland stopped. He looked at the maps. A network of this complexity continuing on its own momentum after its head was removed was not a surprise. It was a confirmation he had suspected and not yet had specific evidence for. How many people mentioned him? 4, separately. None knew each other by name. 2 hadn't spoken to anyone official before tonight. A pause. They spoke to me because I wasn't official. Dressed, who had been standing near the far wall pretending to study a harness, turned around. The look he gave Calla was not warm, but it had changed since the valley. There was something assessing in it now. He did not speak. Bastian caught it. He said nothing. The second week of the journey was harder going. The road deteriorated as the terrain rose, and the cold came down more seriously from the north. Snow fell on 3 of the 7 days. Nothing heavy, but enough to slow the column and press the mood into something grimmer. Calla rode without complaint through all of it. She wore a heavier cloak that one of the supply wagons had provided, dark wool over the black dress, and she moved through the discomfort with the patience of someone who had learned that objecting to conditions was a use of energy better saved for things that could actually be changed. She spoke to survivors in every settlement they passed. By the end of the second week, she had a working description, not the courier's real name, he used different ones in different places, but enough detail from 7 separate conversations to be useful. Tall, left-handed, rode a gray horse, carried an Eastern accent consistent with the Ridge border territories. None of the 7 people she had spoken to knew they were filling in parts of the same picture. She had understood that they were, and had asked her questions accordingly. Bastian began to understand what 4 years alongside Orland Voss had actually built in her. Not complicity, not knowledge. A very specific and unwilling education in how to read the space between what people said and what they meant, between what a face performed and what the body quietly confirmed. Voss had honed that in her without her consent, using it for his own purposes, and it had stayed sharp regardless of what it had cost her. The fifth night brought an inn, a genuine one, the first proper building they had used since the fortress valley. A large stone structure at a crossroads with a wide courtyard, rooms enough for the officers, a covered stable for the horses. Bastian took a corner room on the upper floor. Dressed was directly across the hall. 2 guards stood at the staircase landing. Calla's room was 2 doors down. He did not sleep well. His wolf was restless in the way it became in new environments that hadn't been fully mapped, cataloging sounds, exits, the direction and quality of movements through the building. He lay still and let it work. It was routine. It always settled once the mapping was complete. It did not settle. His wolf kept returning to one location in its internal accounting of the building, the specific room 2 doors down, not assessing it, not flagging it as risk or resource, just returning to it, the way attention snags on something it hasn't finished thinking about. It had been doing a version of this since the valley, subtle enough that he had been able to treat it as background noise during the march. In a quiet room at night, it was considerably less ignorable. He got up. Habit in uncertain environments. He pulled on his boots and moved to the door. The servant at the end of the corridor was wrong. He registered it in the same half-second that he stepped into the hall, a figure carrying a covered tray, moving toward the staircase, and something in the angle of the shoulders that was not right. Not the relaxed, downward focus of someone carrying food. Forward-facing, directed, the particular posture of someone moving toward a specific point rather than away from a kitchen. He stepped back into his doorway and waited. The figure turned toward Calla's door. He crossed the corridor in 4 strides and caught the figure by the back of the collar before the hand reached the latch. The tray hit the floor. The figure twisted, got one arm free, and the movement that followed was trained. Not a servant's panic, but the automatic response of someone who had drilled for exactly this outcome. The knife came from inside the sleeve. It didn't reach him. He had the figure against the wall, the knife on the floor, and his forearm across the throat before Drest's door opened. The 2 staircase guards arrived 11 seconds later. Bastian counted them without meaning to. What he hadn't counted was Calla. Her door was already open. She stood in the frame, fully dressed. She had not been sleeping or had woken before he moved, because she had her boots on and was holding the room's iron fire poker with a grip that made clear she had not picked it up in the last 10 seconds. "I saw him at dinner," she said. Completely level. Bastian looked at her over the restrained figure. "Which table was he watching?" "Yours." A beat. He looked at it the way someone looks at a problem, not at a person. Drest was now fully in the corridor with his sword drawn, taking in the scene with the expression of a man revising a considerable number of prior assessments at speed. The interrogation of the attacker lasted 2 hours and produced something and nothing. The man was hired. That came out early and was clearly true. Payment had passed through a contact he had met once in a different city, through a system layered carefully enough that his own involvement was 3 steps removed from whoever had issued the commission. He did not have a name. He had a location, a specific inn 2 days east, where he had been meant to report after the work was done. He would not be reporting. What he confirmed, under sustained questioning, was when the commission had been issued, within the last 10 days. Which meant that within days of Orlan Voss's death, someone had known the Alpha King had left the fortress with the widow alive, and had considered that a problem requiring immediate resolution. Someone with contacts in the Eastern Territories. Someone who was still operating. "The courier," Drest said afterward, standing with Bastian in the emptied corridor. Not a question. Or whoever the courier reports to. The general stood with that a moment. The 2 guards had taken the attacker below. The inn had gone back to its practiced silence. Drest looked down the corridor toward Calla's closed door and was quiet long enough that it became its own kind of statement. "She spotted him before any of us," he said finally. "Yes." None of the shifted soldiers at the staircase picked it up. "No." Another pause. She would have been the primary target, Drest said. Not you. The knife was heading for her door. Bastian had already worked through this. The commission might have included him as a secondary consideration. A man with a knife in an inn corridor could improvise opportunity. But the direction of movement had been clear. Someone wanted Calla unavailable before she reached the capital, which meant she had already provided information worth acting against, or was on the verge of it. Drest returned to his room. Bastian stood in the corridor and did not move for a while. He was not examining anything in particular. He was simply standing in the space between her door and the staircase, aware that he had ended up there without quite deciding to, and aware that his wolf had no intention of moving until he ordered it directly. He ordered it. He went back to his room. He did not sleep any better than before, but he lay still and managed the restlessness until the light changed outside the shuttered window and the inn began to wake around him. In the morning, he told her about the timeline, how recently the commission had been issued, what it confirmed about the network's continued operation. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. They knew you had me within days, she said. Yes. Then whoever runs what Orlin was part of has something to lose from what I know. She looked at the table surface rather than at him, or from what I haven't understood yet. Dressed, present and leaning against the wall near the window, said nothing. He was looking outside. The set of his shoulders was different from what it had been at the beginning of the march, at the field where he had objected to the whole arrangement. Not warm, not yet. The specific quality, instead, of a man who has stopped actively working against a conclusion and has begun, with reluctance, to follow it where it leads. The column moved out before mid-morning. The capital was 4 days out across terrain that showed no interest in improving. Bastian rode at the front, Calla a few lengths back, the road narrowing as the tree line thickened on both sides. He did not analyze what his wolf kept doing when she was in the same room. He had filed it beside everything else that required the capital before it could be addressed. The council, the investigation, the question Eloise would need to answer once they arrived. 4 days. He could manage 4 days. His wolf disagreed quietly and continued its accounting of exactly where in the column Calla was at any given moment, with a persistence that no amount of deliberate attention to the road ahead seemed capable of interrupting. The capital announced itself a full hour before it was visible. The road widened. Traffic increased. Merchant carts, messengers on fast horses, supply wagons moving in both directions with the purposeful density of a city that had not stopped functioning while its king was away. The soldiers in the column straightened without being ordered to. Bastian noticed this every time he returned from the field, the same reflexive adjustment, as if proximity to stone walls and civilian eyes reminded men that they were something other than an army. Calla said nothing as the gates came into view. She had been quieter since the inn, not withdrawn, but settled into a particular internal focus that he had begun to recognize as her working mode. She processed by going quiet first. He had learned not to interrupt it. They entered through the northern gate, to the kind of attention a returning army always generated. People stepping back from the road, a few calls from the upper windows of buildings, the specific noise of a city acknowledging something significant without stopping for it. Calla kept her eyes forward. The residence allocated to her was in the east wing of the Capitol hold, 2 floors above the record chambers. A set of connected rooms, sleeping quarters, a small sitting room, a hearth that the servants had lit in advance. The window looked over an interior courtyard rather than the street. Private, adequate, not a cell. He showed her himself, which he noted dressed registering without comment. The archivist will bring you whatever you request from the general records, Bastian said at the door. The confiscated documents from Voss's estate are in a sealed room on the floor below. You'll need my written authorization to access them. Will I have it? By morning. She looked at the room behind him, then at him. The council is going to object. They object to most things. They'll object to this specifically. A pause. I don't want to be a problem you have to manage. You're an investigation, he said. That's different. He left her with 2 guards stationed at the corridor entrance, which was standard practice for protected witnesses, and which she accepted without comment. His wolf, which had grown considerably quieter since they passed through the city gates, now resumed its restless orientation every time he moved more than a certain distance from the east wing. He dealt with it by keeping his schedule full enough to demand actual attention. The council session was at midday. He had expected pushback. What he received was the particular variety of council opposition that operated through formal courtesy. Concerns expressed, precedents cited. The careful bureaucratic language of men who understood that direct objection to the Alpha King's decision was futile, but that accumulating the record of their objection was not. Lord Adwell, who managed the capital's domestic affairs with the thoroughness of a man who had never once delegated anything he could hold personally, spoke at measured length about the political implications of housing Orlin Voss's widow in the residence proper. Bastian listened to all of it. Then he confirmed his prior orders without modification and moved to the next subject. Drest, who had attended as a formal observer, caught his eye across the table as the council shifted topics. The general's expression communicated nothing specific. It communicated that he had noted everything. Heloise arrived that afternoon. She came to Calla's rooms at Bastian's request, carrying a leather case worn smooth from decades of use. He had sent word the previous night explaining what the shifted soldiers had experienced in the valley, what his wolf had registered, and what he needed to understand before any of it could be properly addressed. Heloise had been the Alpha King's chief healer for 14 years. She did not rattle easily, and she did not ask unnecessary questions. Bastian was present when she arrived. He had not made a specific decision to be there. He simply was. Heloise examined Calla with the brisk precision of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stripped the process of anything performative. She asked questions while she worked. Family history, both parents, any relatives who had displayed unusual effects on animals or crowds. Calla answered steadily, watching the older woman with the particular attention she applied to everything she was still learning. When Heloise was done, she set down her instruments and looked at Bastian. "Dormant Omega," she said. No preamble. Calla's posture didn't change visibly, but she had gone very still. "Explain it to her," Bastian said. "All of it." Eloise turned to face Calla directly. "Your wolf has never fully surfaced. The ability to shift didn't manifest. In most cases, this means the wolf is absent entirely. A human who carries bloodline traces without the substance." She paused. "In your case, the wolf is present. It simply never found its way through. Which means everything the wolf produces, scent compounds, the chemical signals that shifters use for communication and social regulation, has been accumulating undiluted your entire life." Calla said nothing. "Omega scent in its pure form acts as a suppressor of aggressive wolf instinct," Heloise continued. "In a room full of shifted wolves, a dormant Omega who has never diluted that scent through their own shifting produces a field of effect that can reach 200 yards under the right conditions." A pause. "Your army stopped in a field, sire, because she was standing in it." The silence lasted several seconds. "Orlan knew," Calla said. Not a question. "He would have known before he married you," Heloise said. "A dormant Omega with undiluted scent would have been detectable to any experienced wolf who came close enough. He would have understood what it meant operationally before you did." Calla stood up from the chair. She moved to the window and stood there with her back to the room, her arms crossed at the waist and her head turned toward the courtyard. Her shoulders were controlled. The rest of her wasn't. "Every negotiation," she said. "Yes, every tense room he walked me into. Every time he said it was my presence that helped." A pause. He was right about the mechanism, wrong about everything else. Heloise looked at Bastian. He gave her a small nod, and she gathered her instruments and left with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood when a room needed fewer people in it. Bastian stayed. Calla stood at the window for a long time. He did not fill the silence. There was nothing useful in filling it. When she turned around, her eyes were dry, and her expression had taken on the quality he had seen first at the field table. the look of someone who had already processed grief in private and was now operating in what came after. "I want the archives," she said. "I told you. All of them. Not just the documents from the estate. Every intercepted communication, every trading record, every route manifest from the border territories connected to what Orlin was doing. I want to map every situation where I was used." Her voice was flat and precise. "Not because I need to punish myself with the inventory, because if I was present at every negotiation that went wrong for the right side, then I was present at every moment that the other side gained advantage. I can map what they gained, which tells us what they still have." Bastian looked at her. "That takes longer than an overnight review," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." He sent the written authorization to the archivist before evening. She worked for 9 days. He knew this because Dress tracked the hours the record chamber lamp burned, with the slightly aggrieved thoroughness of a general who had decided that if he couldn't stop an investigation, he could at least document it. Bastian received this information each morning without comment. He noted it and moved on to the day's other business and did not examine the intensity of attention he was paying to the updates. He visited the record chamber twice, both times with specific questions arising from other parts of the investigation. Calla showed him what she had found without being asked to explain her method, which was orderly and lateral. She built from the things she knew with certainty outward toward the things she suspected, making the structure of the connections visible rather than just their conclusions. The documents were spread across 3 long tables in an arrangement that would have looked chaotic to anyone who hadn't watched her build it. It didn't look chaotic. On the 9th day, she sent word that she needed the council. Bastian read the message twice. He had not expected the request to be collective rather than directed at him alone. He sent back a confirmation and spent the hour before the session standing in the corridor outside the chamber, aware that he was doing it and not particularly inclined to stop. The council session was formal. Calla stood at the head of the table, his table technically, which he had vacated without making a point of it, with 3 documents spread before her and a map she had reconstructed from memory and cross-referenced against 6 separate source documents. She presented systematically, not defensively, not with the careful over-explanation of someone who anticipated disbelief. She laid each piece of evidence and moved to the next. And the picture she built was specific enough that even Lord Adwell, who had spent most of the past week making formal inquiries about the precedent for witnesses accessing classified records, stopped writing at some point and started paying attention. The man who had financed Orlin Voss from the beginning was not a foreign buyer. He was Rolf, Lord of Caldenmere, a border territory whose southern edge lay 2 days north of the capital, and whose primary passes lay another 2 beyond that, controlling 3 mountain routes and historically resisting Alpha King oversight on the grounds of geographic isolation. The financing trail was not direct. It moved through 4 intermediary points, but Calla had mapped all 4, identified the pattern of their function, and traced the specific payments backward to the one account that appeared, in some form, at every junction. "This document," she said, placing a hand on the center page, "shows the same code notation in the upper margin that appears in 11 other documents sourced from 3 different locations over 4 years. The notation is not a word. It is a number system. When I cross-referenced it with the trading ledgers from the Caldenmere Pass for the same period, the amounts aligned to within 6%. A pause. That variance accounts for courier costs." The council was quiet. Lord Adwell said slowly, "You reconstructed a coded payment system from margin notations." "I lived with someone who built coded systems," Calla said. "I recognized the architecture." Bastian watched the table. 3 council members were reading the documents she had placed. 2 were looking at the map. Adwell was looking at Calla with the expression of a man who had come to a session prepared for one kind of meeting and found himself in an entirely different one. The skepticism was still present. It operated now more carefully, the skepticism of men calculating whether accepting the evidence required them to act on it, and what that action would cost politically, rather than the prior skepticism of men who had simply assumed the evidence was insufficient. The distinction mattered. It was the difference between doubt and inconvenience. Bastian caught it. He looked at Calla at the head of his table, 9 days of archive work condensed into 3 documents and a map, presenting to 8 men who had spent those same 9 days expressing varying degrees of displeasure at her presence in the building. She was not performing patience. She was simply doing the next thing, and the thing after that, and treating the council's reception as a variable she had already accounted for. His wolf reacted, not to threat, to something else. The specific involuntary surge of an animal registering something it considers its own being disregarded. The low-frequency response that preceded the kind of behavior he had learned over 31 years to control carefully in formal settings. He pressed it down. The effort was more visible to himself than he would have preferred. Heloise, standing near the back wall at Bastian's request, observed this with the same clinical attention she had given everything else since the examination. Her eyes moved from Bastian to Calla and back with the unhurried assessment of a woman who had just confirmed a second data point. She said nothing. She did not need to. The session concluded without a formal resolution. Bastian announced that he would review the evidence and provide direction within 48 hours. The council filed out with the specific quality of people who understood that 48 hours meant the decision was already made and the review was a formality. Drest waited until the room had emptied before he spoke. "Caldenmere," he said. "Yes. Rolf has held that territory for 20 years. He has a standing agreement with 2 other border lords that amounts to a defensive compact. Moving against him means—" "I know what it means. I want to make certain you've thought through the full scope of it." "I have." Bastian picked up one of the documents Calla had left on the table. The margin notation was clear once you knew what you were looking at. Rolf built the network with Voss as its instrument. Voss is gone. Rolf is still there, the network is still running, and the widow of the man he employed has now identified him by name in front of 8 council members. He set the document down. He will know about this session within a week. Drest was quiet. "He won't wait," Bastian said. "We shouldn't either." He left the chamber. In the corridor, he paused. Calla was at the far end, near the window that overlooked the street below, standing with her arms at her sides and her eyes on the city. She had the map folded in one hand. She had not heard him come out, or had chosen not to respond to it. He considered briefly going back inside. He walked toward her instead, and when she turned at the sound of his boots on the stone floor, there was something in her face that was not quite relief and not quite its opposite. The expression of a person who had been alone with a difficult thing for long enough that another presence, the right one, was simply a different texture of the same silence. He stood beside her at the window. Below, the capital continued. Carts and voices and the smell of cook fires coming up from the lower quarter. The ordinary mechanics of a city that did not know that 8 men had just sat in a room above it and debated whether to act on evidence that could start a war. "They'll accept it," she said. "They already have." They looked like they hadn't. That's different from not accepting it. He looked at the street. They were calculating the cost. They've done that. The answer was the same regardless of how long they sat with it. She turned the folded map in her hands once, then held it still. "And Rolf. Rolf is the next part," he said. She nodded, not resigned. Something harder than that. The nod of someone who had already decided that there was no direction but forward and was simply marking the moment before the next step. The city moved below them. After a while, they both went back inside. The messenger arrived from Caldenmere on the 4th day after the council session. Bastian read the letter once, set it on the table, and read it again. The language was formal. The tone was not. Rolf had written it himself. He could tell by the rhythm of the sentences, the places where bureaucratic phrasing gave way to something more direct. The signature pressed harder into the parchment than any clerk would have pressed it. The letter rejected the Alpha King's request to answer the evidence presented. It cited insufficient proof. It cited jurisdictional precedent regarding border territory autonomy. It cited at length the historical independence of the mountain passes from capital oversight in matters of internal trade. It did not explain the margin notations. It did not explain the payment alignments. It did not address the courier, the attacker at the inn, or the 4 intermediary points Calla had traced back to his accounts. What it did, in its final paragraph, was close the Caldenmere passes to authorize traffic. Supply wagons from 3 Allied territories to the north were now rerouted, which in practical terms meant that approximately 40,000 people would be managing a winter with significantly reduced grain access unless the situation resolved quickly. Bastian sent for Drest. The general arrived in 7 minutes, read the letter standing, and handed it back with the expression of a man who had not expected this particular development, but had maintained a category for it. "He's moved faster than I expected," Drest said. "He had less time to move than he expected." Bastian set the letter down. "We have 8 council members who know his name. He knows we know. Waiting wasn't an option for him. The supply blockade is leverage. He's testing whether you'll move on a border lord over a widow's evidence or whether you'll negotiate to reopen the passes. He miscalculated what kind of evidence it is." Most men would have. Drest looked at the window. "When do we move?" 3 days to prepare the column. "We travel light. This is not a siege, it's a confrontation. I want it resolved before the northern territories reach crisis." Bastian folded the letter. "Inform the council this afternoon." Drest nodded, turned toward the door, and stopped. He stood for a moment with his back still turned. "She'll ask to come," he said. "I know. And you'll need to have an answer ready." He left without elaborating. The council session that afternoon was shorter than the previous one. The supply blockade had converted the abstract question of Rolf's guilt into an immediate logistical problem, which had the effect of making 8 men with competing positions agree faster than they otherwise would have. The campaign was authorized. The timeline was accepted. The route was approved. Lord Adwell raised the question of Calla's status during the campaign. He framed it as an administrative matter. What designation applied to a material witness during a military operation? What protections were guaranteed? What liability the Crown assumed for her continued safety while engaged in active confrontation with the party whose crimes she had documented? Bastian recognized the frame. Adwell was not asking about Calla's safety. He was registering for the formal record his continued objection to her presence in the operational sphere. "She remains under Crown protection," Bastian said. "Her designation and location during the campaign are at my discretion." He moved to the next item. Adwell wrote something down. Calla came to him that evening. He had been in the map room, a long chamber off the strategy corridor where the campaign materials had been laid out since midday. The route to Caldenmere traced across 4 overlapping maps that covered the central table entirely. She knocked at the open door and waited until he looked up before she came in. She looked at the maps, then at him. "I want to come," she said. "I know." "Then you know I have arguments." "I'm certain of it." He set down the marking tool he had been using. "Make them." She had prepared. He could tell from the structure of it. She had moved through her own reasoning until it was orderly, and now she delivered it the same way she had delivered the council presentation, without apology and without decoration. She had spent 12 days working with Heloise on control. Not in the way the word was typically applied to something involuntary. Heloise had been clear from the beginning that suppression wasn't the goal and wasn't really possible. But direction was. With consistent practice, Calla could narrow the field of effect, concentrate it toward a specific direction, or reduce it close enough to nothing that it was not operationally relevant unless she actively chose otherwise. It was not reliable under extreme stress. It was reliable enough under controlled conditions that Heloise had said so, in writing, which Calla produced from her sleeve and placed on the map table. She also knew the Caldenmere geography. 4 years of Orland's documents had included detailed pass maps, internal patrol records, and territorial notes he had collected from Rolf's own couriers. She had memorized the relevant sections while working through the archives. She named 3 specific features of the primary pass that did not appear on any of the official military maps currently spread across the table. Bastian looked at the maps, then at the document from Heloise, then at her. "I know," he said. Then, "I know your arguments are good." He set his hands flat on the table. "My objection is not to your arguments." She waited. He had rehearsed this in the way he rehearsed difficult conversations, not scripting them, but identifying in advance the point at which honesty became the more defensible position than strategy. He had reached that point approximately 2 days ago and had been moving around it since. "The bond," he said. Nothing in her face changed suddenly, but something settled, the way a room settles when a sound that has been present below hearing finally stops. "I know what it is," she said, quietly. "I know you do." He kept his voice level. "Since Eloise examined you, you've known. Since the inn, actually." A pause. "I noticed what you were doing with your position in rooms. It took me a few days to understand what it meant." Another pause, shorter. "I feel the edges of it. Not the same way you do, I think, but it's there." He looked at her directly. "Taking you into a field operation while the bond is active and unresolved is not a tactical decision. My wolf will not function as a separate concern from your location in a combat situation. That is a specific and significant liability in a confrontation with an alpha who will be looking for exactly that kind of opening." She held his gaze. "I understand that. Then you understand why I said no." "I understand why you said no the first time," she said. "I'm asking you to work through the rest of it." He waited. "Orlin made decisions about my function and my value and my safety without telling me what he was deciding or why," she said. "Every time, for 4 years. He thought he was managing the situation. He thought keeping me unaware was a form of protection." Her voice stayed even. "You know the difference between what he did and what you're doing right now. I'm telling you that I know it too. And I'm asking you not to cross that line even with better intentions than he had." The map room was quiet. Outside, the corridor had the particular settled silence of a building in the hour before full dark, when activity had drained away and the night watch hadn't fully begun. Bastian looked at the table, not at the maps, past them, at the grain of the wood underneath, the kind of looking that wasn't really looking, but was doing something else entirely. His wolf was not restless right now. It was paying attention with a quality he didn't have a clean description for. The full, still attention of an animal that has stopped moving because moving would interrupt something it needs to hear. "If you come," he said finally, "you act as strategist. Heloise's assessment is the ceiling of what I ask you to use, and only under conditions she has already approved. You are not a weapon I deploy. You are a person who made a choice with full information." He paused. "That means when I tell you to hold position, you hold position. Not because I'm deciding for you. Because we agreed in advance that that's how it works." She looked at him for a long moment. "Agreed. Drest will know about the bond. He needs to understand the operational variable. That's your conversation to have." "Yes." He picked up the marking tool again and returned his attention to the maps. "We move in 3 days." She didn't leave immediately. He had not expected her to. She came to stand on the other side of the table and looked at the maps with the same assessing attention she brought to documents, locating, cross-referencing, running the terrain against what she already knew. "This pass," she said, pointing to the route marked on the primary map. "Orlin's records show a secondary garrison here." Her finger moved 2 inches east of the marked position. "Not primary force. Overflow housing for contracted men he didn't want visible in the main count. If Rolf is using the same structure, you'll have an additional contingent at your flank that won't appear on any official record." Bastian looked at where she was pointing. He looked at his own maps. He took the marking tool and made a notation. Neither of them said anything for a while. He was aware of her presence on the other side of the table, with the particular texture he had been learning to identify as distinct from general situational awareness. Something that ran parallel to thought rather than through it. Constant and not uncomfortable, the way a well-banked fire was aware of the room it was heating. His wolf, for the first time in 11 years, was not cataloging exits. Drest received the information the following morning in the strategy corridor, during the column preparation review. Bastian told him directly and without prologue, the same way he delivered any operationally relevant intelligence. Drest listened without interrupting. When Bastian finished, the general stood with it for a moment. "You're certain," Drest said. "Eloise confirmed it 2 days after we arrived. And she—" He stopped, reformulated. "Does she understand what it means for the operation?" "We discussed it last night." Drest looked at the corridor wall, which had recently become a surface he found useful for processing information. "And you've decided she comes." "She comes as a strategist. The conditions are clearly defined." Another silence. The general's jaw worked slightly. The specific movement of a man revising a position he had held long enough that the revision required physical adjustment. He had objected in the snowfield. He had objected at the camp. He had stopped objecting somewhere between the inn corridor and the capital. And what he was doing now was something different from objection. The careful acceptance of a conclusion that had been approaching for several weeks and had finally arrived. "She knows this territory better than my cartographers," Drest said finally. "Yes. And she spotted the hired man before any of the shifted guards." "Yes." Drest exhaled slowly through his nose. "I'll adjust the column formation," he said. "If the bond creates a tactical liability, I need to be positioned to cover for it without being told in the moment. I'll give you the parameters before we move." The general nodded and turned back to his preparations. The 3 days of readying the column were the kind of days that had a specific texture Bastian recognized from every campaign. Focused, dense, moving too fast and too slowly at once. The supply requisitions, the horse assignments, the communication to the northern territories advising them of the timeline, the formal record of the council's authorization prepared for the Crown Archives. The administrative architecture of a decision already made. Calla spent those days in the record chamber, pulling the last of the Caldenmere-specific documents and compressing what was relevant into a set of organized notes she could carry. He saw her twice in the corridors, once near the strategy room, once at the stairs leading to the east wing. And each time his wolf did the thing it had been doing since the snowfield, that low, persistent orientation, the animal equivalent of a compass finding north. He stopped fighting it. Not because he had resolved anything, but because fighting it was using resources he needed for the campaign, and Eloise, who had raised the subject with clinical bluntness the previous afternoon, had confirmed that active suppression of a recognized bond was more operationally disruptive than allowing it to settle. "It will calm when you stop resisting it," she had said, in the tone she used when she was telling him something he already knew, and had simply not yet permitted himself to act on. "I'm not resisting it." She had looked at him over the top of her instruments. She did not need to say anything further. On the morning of departure, Bastian stood at the courtyard while the column formed. The air was cold and still, the sky the particular pale gray of winter mornings in the capital that never quite decided whether they were going to clear or deepen. The horses moved with the deliberate restlessness of animals that had been stabled long enough to want open ground. Calla arrived before several of the officers. She was dressed practically, a dark riding coat, her hair braided close, a saddlebag that had the compact weight of documents rather than clothing. She mounted without assistance, checked her horse's head once, and looked out at the forming column with an expression that had left grieving behind some time ago and was now simply present. Drest brought his horse alongside Bastian's. "Column is ready," he said. Bastian looked at the gate, then at Calla, positioned 3 horses back on the right flank, already reading the formation. "Move out," he said. The column began to move. The capital fell behind them gradually, the stone giving way to the outer districts, then the road, then the open terrain that began to rise as they moved north toward the mountains. Bastian rode without conversation, which suited Drest and was unremarkable to anyone who had served with him. At the noon halts, Calla occasionally took her horse a short distance off the road under the pretense of checking the route notes and returned with a steadier expression, and the shifted soldiers nearest her no longer reacting to her with the same involuntary startle they had on the first day. Bastian noticed. He did not ask what, precisely, she was testing. His wolf was quiet. Not the quiet of suppression. Not the quiet of an animal that has been told to stand down. The quiet of something that has been moving toward a fixed point for a very long time and has finally, simply arrived close enough to stop running. The road to Caldenmere was 4 days. The passes would be cold, and the garrison would be where Calla had said it would be. And Rolf would not be expecting the Alpha King to arrive with both a military column and the specific woman whose evidence had already cost him the element of surprise. Bastian did not look back at the capital. There was nothing unfinished there. Everything unfinished was moving north with him at a steady canter, 3 horses to the right. Caldenmere announced its trouble before the column reached the pass. The sound came first, a low, sustained pressure in the air that Bastian's wolf registered as a physical thing before his ears confirmed it as noise. It was the sound of 2 packs in active confrontation, not the sharp burst of individual combat, but the deeper, rolling tension of organized lines holding position against each other with the specific intensity that preceded mass engagement. He knew the sound from the Eastern campaigns, from 3 years of border wars that had ended badly for everyone involved. He raised his fist. The column stopped. Drest came alongside him at a canter. "Advanced scouts report 2 packs in the lower pass," the general said. "Rolf's wolves on the ridge side. Our allied contingents from the Fenward and Greyvale territories below. Rolf moved against them when they attempted to reopen the northern supply route this morning. They're holding formation, but they won't hold it long." "How many?" "Rolf's wolves, estimated 60. Allied contingents combined, 42. Our column arrives, and Rolf's line outnumbers us in shifted combatants by approximately 2 to 1 in the forward position." Drest's jaw tightened. "Engaging directly through the pass costs us the approach advantage and concentrates casualties in a channel that favors the defense." Bastian looked ahead at the pass entrance. Stone walls rising on both sides, the road narrowing to a width that made tactical formations irrelevant. Numbers would determine it, and numbers were not on their side in the first 100 yards. He turned in the saddle. Calla was 3 horses back, already watching him. She had been watching since the column slowed. Her hand was resting flat on her horse's neck, steadying the animal, which was reacting to the same sound pressure that had reached the wolves. And her expression was the one he had learned to read as her actively calculating. He brought his horse alongside hers. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. "Not tell you, ask." She waited. "If you enter the pass on foot, ahead of the column, the field of effect may be enough to break the locked formation before either side engages. Not eliminate the conflict. Create a window." He kept his voice level and did not look away from her face. "It carries risk. If it doesn't hold long enough, you are in the center of what follows. I know what it carries." Heloise's assessment said it was reliable under controlled conditions. He held her gaze. "This is not controlled conditions." "No." She looked at the pass entrance. "But I've been practicing in uncontrolled conditions for the past 4 days on the road." A pause. "I didn't mention that to you because I wanted to know first whether it worked." "Does it?" "Mostly." She looked back at him. "Mostly is what we have." His wolf pushed forward with an urgency that he compressed into stillness through the specific effort of a man who has had 31 years of practice with exactly this kind of compression. The bond ran between them like a wire pulled tight, and every instinct he had was producing the same answer in the same direction, and that answer was not send her forward into a conflict zone. He did not move. "You decide," he said. "Not me. Not the bond. You." She was quiet for 3 seconds. He counted them. "I'll go," she said. "Have your line ready to move the moment the formation breaks. Don't wait for me to clear the center." He nodded. He did not say anything else because anything else would have been for his own benefit rather than hers, and he had made a specific commitment about that. She dismounted, handed her reins to the nearest rider, and walked toward the pass entrance without looking back. His wolf went absolutely still, not calm, still. The specific stillness of an animal that has released control of a situation it cannot determine and is now channeling every available instinct into monitoring rather than action. His hands were on his reins, his breathing was even. He was watching the pass entrance with the full attention of his wolf behind his eyes, and he was not moving, and it cost him more than any physical combat had cost him in years. Dressed came alongside him. The general looked at the pass entrance. He looked at Bastian. He said nothing, which was the most useful thing he could have done. The change in the pass happened gradually and then all at once. Bastian heard it. The sustained pressure of two locked formations began to shift in quality. The low, rolling tension lost its forward edge first. The specific sound of wolves that were holding aggression in active readiness becoming something different, something that still held shape but had lost its certainty about what the shape was for. Then the individual sounds, growls dropping in register, the sharp movements of animals repositioning away from full engagement posture, the particular silence of 100 creatures simultaneously confused about what they were doing. "Move," Bastian said. The column surged forward. He came through the pass entrance at speed with Dressed at his left flank and 12 of his best shifted soldiers fanning behind him. And the scene that opened up was exactly what the scouts had described, and nothing like it at the same time. Rolf's 60 wolves occupied the upper ridge position, shifted, still in formation, but with the fractured focus of a line whose aggression has been interrupted at a biological level. The allied packs below had stopped their own preparation for engagement and were standing with the bewildered steadiness of soldiers who had expected a charge and received silence instead. In the center of the pass, Calla stood on the road with her arms at her sides. She was not performing anything. She was simply there, and the air around her had the specific quality that Bastian had registered for the first time in a snowfield more than a month earlier. Not visible, not audible, just present. A quality that his own wolf recognized and the wolves on both sides were responding to against their own volition. Bastian's column pushed between the two lines with the momentum of a formation that had entered a space expecting resistance and found it absent. His soldiers separated the packs with the practiced efficiency of men used to managing exactly this kind of volatile standoff. The allied contingent stepped back. Rolf's wolves held the ridge but did not descend. The window lasted 4 minutes. It was enough. Rolf descended on foot from the ridgeline when it became clear that the confrontation he had engineered had failed its intended outcome. He was a large man, broader than Bastian, older by nearly 20 years, with the specific physical presence of a wolf who had been dominant in his territory long enough that his body had stopped distinguishing between authority and mass. He came down the rocky slope without hurrying, which was its own kind of statement. He looked at his own wolves, still held in the fractured formation. He looked at the column separating the packs. He looked at Calla, standing in the road, and something in his expression moved through calculation and arrived at a decision. "The Alpha King brings a weapon to his confrontations now," Rolf said. His voice carried. He had positioned himself for it. A widow's parlor trick, deployed against honest wolves. He looked at Calla directly. "Does he tell you what you are to him? Or does he let you believe you chose to be here?" The pass was quiet enough that the words reached every soldier in it. Calla looked at Rolf. She did not look at Bastian first. She did not take time to compose her response. She answered from where she stood, with the full voice of a woman who had spent 4 years learning the specific difference between a truth and a performance of one. "The man who used me without telling me what I was doing built a system," she said. "He kept the knowledge from me because the knowledge would have given me a choice, and he needed me not to have one." She held Rolf's gaze without moving toward him. "I'm standing in this pass because I was told what was being asked, what it would cost, and what the alternatives were. Then I was asked." A pause that the pass held in complete silence. "You built the same system Orlin Voss built. You're standing there hoping I don't know the difference between them." She let that land. "I know the difference." Neither pack moved. Rolf's expression had not changed into anything useful, which meant that the calculation was complete and the confrontation had shifted to its final shape. He turned toward Bastian. "Then let's conclude this between the parties it actually concerns," he said. What followed was not long. Rolf was a powerful wolf. and he fought with the economy of a man who had resolved many things this way over 20 years. No performance, no wasted motion, the focused engagement of a dominant alpha who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything to anyone except the one person directly in front of him. He was stronger than Bastian in brute terms. He was faster than his age suggested. He had fought in this terrain before and knew where the footing changed. Bastian knew he was better. He was 3 moves into the engagement when it happened. A sound from Calla's direction, not alarm, not pain, just a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, the kind that a person produces when something unexpected happens to them physically. His wolf pulled. A single violent lurch of attention away from the fight and toward the sound, a biological command so abrupt that his next defensive movement arrived a half-second late. Rolf's strike caught his shoulder. Not the angle it had been aimed for. Bastian had rotated enough, but the impact was full, and it staggered him 2 steps to the left. He caught his balance on the rock behind him. His wolf snapped back into the fight with the specific ferocity of an animal that has been interrupted and is now operating on something rawer than strategy. The next 3 moves were not elegant. They were efficient, and they were final. Rolf went down. He stayed down. Not dead. The intention had never been to kill, because the evidence needed a witness, and Kaldenmir needed a formal transfer of authority rather than a power vacuum at the northern passes. Dressed soldiers moved in. Bastian stepped back. He was breathing harder than he should have been for a fight of that length. His shoulder would bruise seriously. He was aware of both of these things at a distance, because his attention had already moved to where Calla was standing, 20 feet away, against the rock wall of the pass. She was upright. She was unharmed. She had both hands pressed flat against the stone behind her and was looking at him with an expression he didn't have a name for, wide open, without any of her usual composure, like something had gone through all of her at once and left her without the architecture she normally used to organize what showed on her face. He went to her. "Are you hurt?" he said. She shook her head. Something happened. Her voice was different. When the fight, something happened to me." He looked at her properly. Her eyes were tracking the space around her in small, rapid movements, like someone recalibrating a sense they hadn't known was available. Her breathing was shallow. "Describe it," he said. "Everything." She stopped. She was looking at him now, specifically at him, with the focused and slightly overwhelmed attention of someone looking at a familiar thing through an unfamiliar sense. "You smell different," she said. "Not different from before. Different from everything." A pause. "Different from everything else." He went very still. "I've been smelling things differently since we entered the pass," she said. "But you..." She pressed her hands harder against the stone. "I know what this is. I know what this is," Heloise explained it. She looked at her own hands. "My wolf? Yes. It's not a shift. It's not... I didn't change. The first manifestation is usually sensory." He kept his voice level and even. "Eloise will need to confirm what's happening internally. But yes." She looked at him again. That same open expression, unguarded in a way he had not seen from her before. The bond ran between them with a clarity that was almost physical. Not the constrained, compressed presence it had been since the snowfield, but something that had found the space it needed to exist at full weight. She didn't look away from him. "I need a moment," she said. "Take it." She stayed against the rock wall and breathed. Around them, the pass was moving through the ordered aftermath of a confrontation concluded, soldiers managing the separated packs, dressed coordinating the formal detainment of Rolf, the Allied contingent commanders receiving their first instructions from Bastian's officers. The machinery of resolution running its course, indifferent to the 2 people standing slightly apart from it. Bastian waited. He was good at waiting when he understood what he was waiting for. When she pushed off the stone wall and straightened, she had recovered most of her composure. Not all of it. There was something still present in her face that had not been there before, something she was not attempting to put away, as if she had decided that certain things no longer needed to be contained. "Eloise will want to examine me," Calla said. When we return to the capital. How long until we return? A week. There's work to do here before the territory can be formally transferred. He paused. The passes need to be reopened today. The northern supply routes take priority. She nodded. I can help with the territorial documentation. I know Rolf's record-keeping structure from Orland's files. I know. They stood for a moment in the way they had been standing in rooms together for 3 weeks, close enough that the space between them was aware of itself, without either of them moving to close or increase it. The bond, she said. We should talk about it. Yes. Not here. No. He looked at the pass around them. Soldiers, detained wolves, 2 pack commanders waiting for their instructions. Tonight, when this is done. She agreed with a small nod, and they both returned to the work of the pass. The evening came slowly. Caldenmir's interior fortress was cleared and occupied by Bastion's soldiers before dark. The Allied packs were settled in the lower barracks. Rolf was secured under formal guard with the documentation of his detainment properly witnessed and recorded. The pass records were located in the territorial lord's study. 6 locked chests of documents that Calla identified, organized, and began cataloging with the same systematic attention she had applied to Orland's archives, except faster, because she now recognized the notation structure from its source. Within the first hour, she had isolated the courier ledgers as well. 3 receipt books and a dispatch roll that confirmed the same rider she had reconstructed from village accounts had been moving payments and instructions between Caldenmir and the eastern contacts long after Orland's death. Drest found Bastion in the upper corridor at some point in the evening and reported on the column status, the territorial handover timeline, and the initial communication to the northern supply territories, confirming that the passes would reopen at dawn. Then he stopped, with the specific pause of a man who has something else to say and is choosing how. She held the pass, Drest said. Yes, I've been in 43 engagements over 30 years. He looked down the corridor. I have never seen a line of 60 wolves lose its formation without a direct physical cause. He was quiet for a moment. I understand it better now than I did in the snowfield. I'm not certain I understand it fully. You don't need to. No. A pause. She responded to Rolf the right way. Bastion said nothing. I don't give approval for the Alpha King's choices, Drest said, with the slight dryness of a man clarifying his own jurisdiction. I'm observing that the woman I objected to bringing out of a snowfield has been correct about most things in my experience of her, and that my initial assessment was based on a category she didn't fit. He met Bastion's eyes. I wanted to say it directly. I'll tell her. Drest nodded and went back to his work. He found Calla in the study when the fortress had quieted. She was at the desk with 2 candles and an open document, and she looked up when he came in and set the papers aside without marking her place. A small gesture that meant she had been waiting, without performing the fact of it. They sat across the desk from each other. What do you want it to be? He asked. He meant the bond. He meant all of it. She considered the question for the full time it deserved. I want it to be a choice I'm making, she said. Not an instinct I'm following because the biology is louder than the reasons. A pause. I want to know that what I feel toward you is mine. That it was built from what I've actually seen, not from what a bond compels. She looked at her hands. I want more time. Yes, he said. She looked up. You wanted more time before I said it. Since the road, probably. Then we want the same thing. She held his gaze. I'm not asking to resolve nothing. I'm asking to resolve it at a pace where I trust the conclusion when it arrives. He nodded. I know what you are, she said. I've watched you in snowfields and in councils and in corridors and in a fight where your wolf pulled toward me at the worst possible moment. A pause. I know what that cost you. I saw it. He said nothing. I'm not unaffected by any of it, she said quietly. I want to be clear about that. The candles moved between them. Outside, the northern wind was doing something to the shuttered windows that suggested the temperature had dropped seriously since dark. Then we start from here, Bastion said, with what we know, without pretending we know less than we do or more than we do. Agreed. They sat in the study for a while longer without needing to fill it. The documents were on the desk. The fortress was quiet around them. The bond ran between them at its full weight, present, acknowledged, no longer compressed. And it was neither simple nor resolved nor finished. And neither of them had any interest in treating it as though it were. When she finally rose to go to her room, she paused at the door. "Dressed," she said. "He changed his position." "I know, he told me." Something in her face shifted. Not surprise, but the look of someone receiving information they didn't know they had needed. "Will you tell him I noticed?" "Yes." She left. The snowfield was more than a month behind them, in distance and in everything else. What had begun there, a woman digging a grave in the dark, an army stopped without an order, had moved through ink and archives and a mountain pass and come to rest here, in a corridor of a captured fortress where 2 candles were still burning in an empty study. In the spring, when the snow pulled back from the valley and the turned earth of a simple grave was visible again for the first time since winter, they returned. Not deliberately. The route south happened to move through the valley, and neither of them suggested altering it. The stone was exactly where Calla had placed it, unmarked. She had not wanted a name on it, and she had not changed her mind about that. She dismounted and stood beside it for a few minutes, not performing grief and not performing the absence of it, just standing with the full and honest weight of 4 years that had been real even when the man at the center of them had not been. Bastian stood at a distance that was respectful and present at once. When she came back to her horse, the valley held the stillness of early spring mornings, cold still, but with something different in the air, a loosening that hadn't been there in winter. She mounted without looking back. He fell into pace beside her. The road south opened ahead of them, wide enough for 2 horses riding alongside each other without crowding, and neither of them said anything for a long time, and the silence was the kind that had been built over weeks and kilometers and hard conversations and held positions, the kind that had weight and texture and did not need to be filled. The valley fell behind them. The road continued. And that is where we leave Calla and Bastian. If you made it here, thank you. This is the first video I have posted in a long time, and I will be honest, I was nervous to come back. But here we are. I am doing some testing on the channel right now, trying new things. So if something feels different, that is exactly what is happening. Moonlight Chronicles is finding its shape again, and I am glad you are here for it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. I read all of them.